Welcome back. All right, second season preview for today, and it's Pittsburgh. So I previewed Detroit, now I preview Pittsburgh, teams that met each other in 2008 and 2009 in the Stanley Cup Final. And now we talk about a Pittsburgh Penguins team that, much like Detroit, well, they missed the playoffs this year. The difference between Pittsburgh and Detroit is Detroit's well into a rebuild. Pittsburgh is denying that rebuild. Pittsburgh's decided to double down on the core. Crosby, Malkin, Letang. I mean, on some level, it makes sense, right? They're still productive. They're still very good players. Letang had a down year from where he was the year before, but he's still very good on the blue line. And Malkin, Crosby down the middle is your 1-2. That's pretty elite. So for Crosby, who at points this past season was the top producing player in the National Hockey League 5-on-5, if this power play ends up being as good as Erik Karlsson could make it, maybe Crosby gets back above 100 points for the first time in a while. So really part of the key too for Pittsburgh this year is simply going to be Crosby, Malkin, and Karlsson in San Jose all avoided injury this past year. They have to do it again. And once you get into your mid-30s, that's a tall ask. That is a really tough one to accomplish. And so for a Pittsburgh team that finished 40, 31, and 11, they were 1 point back of Florida. If they win that game against Chicago, we're having a whole different conversation regarding Pittsburgh and regarding Florida. Florida's season would have been seen as a failure. They missed the playoffs. What's wrong with this team? But instead, Florida makes the playoffs. They go all the way to the Stanley Cup Final. Pittsburgh misses the playoffs. And now we've seen a lot of upheaval with this lineup, right? So their goals scored and goals against, they scored 3.18 goals per game. They allowed 3.21 goals per game this past year. They want the goal scoring up, the goals against down. It's really simple, and it sounds really simple because it is, but it's easier said than done, right? Especially if the team is falling off. So adding Karlsson, the idea is to stop the bleeding and help the team jump back above the playoff line for the first time in 1 year. They made the playoffs in 2022, missed in 2023. They don't want that to still say last made the playoffs in 2022 next spring, because if they miss the playoffs again, then with Kyle Dubas, you kind of have to make changes, right? They last won a round in 2018. This is a team that won the Stanley Cup in 2016 and 2017. In 2018, it looked like they could be on their way to their third in a row, and Washington stopped them as Washington won their first and to date only Stanley Cup. So for the Pittsburgh Penguins, this is a big year. This is also a year that sees them with no cap space. They are a team that currently sits just mildly above the salary cap. I think it's like $70,000. It's not much. So that's the kind of money that you can just send somebody on a league minimum contract to the minors, whether they do or don't require waivers, whatever. But they're one of about half the teams in the league who have, a salary cap issue where they're right at or above the salary cap. Some of those will get better once we get into the LTIR portion of the season as regular season looms, but Pittsburgh probably not going to be able to make any additions for the rest of the offseason unless they move money out to bring money in. So their top five scorers this past season, Sidney Crosby, 82 games, 33 goals, 60 assists, 93 points. Crosby is, I would say, arguably the best player in the league over the last 20 years. It's arguable because a recent video I was told that McDavid's clearly a much better player than Crosby ever was, which to me is a bold take, and I say it's a bold take because 3 Stanley Cup rings, 2 Conn Smythe trophies, and just widely seen as one of the best players in the history of the game. I'm not willing to just shove Crosby aside in favor of McDavid, which I don't see as a slight to McDavid. It's just the fact that Crosby, absolutely one of the best players of his generation, and Malkin severely underrated as well. 82 games, 27 goals, 56 assists, 83 points. Barely above a point per game, but again, once you're in your mid-30s, if you're still above a point per game, it says a lot about your conditioning, your willingness to adapt to the game, because every year is different. Every year gets more difficult to get yourself in shape and to stay ahead of the younger guys in the league. And so kudos to Crosby and Malkin for being able to get it done. And again, staying healthy is key. Jake Gensel, 78 games, 36 goals, 37 assists, 73 points. Solid goal scorer. You can rely on him for 35 to 40 goals almost every year. And as long as he stays healthy, he should be their top scoring winger. And again, he will be if he stays healthy, I would think, although maybe Riley Smith has a career year after the addition to Pittsburgh. Raquel had quite the season, 82 games, 28 goals, 32 assists, 60 points. Jason Zucker, who is no longer with the team, 78 games, 27 goals, 21 assists, 48 points. So replacing those goals from Zucker, and considering this team had their struggles with goal scoring at certain points this year, that's going to be very key. And again, bringing in Karlsson should help to inflate those totals. Goaltending. So one bone of contention with Pittsburgh is going to be goaltending. They doubled down with Jari. It felt like at the time Dubas came in, he didn't really have much of a choice. That if he wanted to upgrade the goaltending, that window had already kind of closed. Jari, 47 games, 24, 13, and 7 record, 909 save percentage. Jari can be a very good goaltender. The consistency over a full 82 games has been questioned. His ability to stay healthy for a full 82 games has been questioned as well, which with the Penguins, again, a lot of these players, whether it's Letang, Crosby, Malkin, Karlsson, or, Jari, there's going to be the, so how long can they stay healthy question that's out there. DeSmith, 33 games, 15, 16, and 4 record, 905 save percentage. He, of course, has left the team. Tokarski, 3 games this past season, a 1-2 record with an 897 save percentage. Tokarski, a solid number 3 option. For this year, it would appear that Nedeljkovic gets the backup role, but maybe there's something else coming down the pike between now and the start of the regular season, or Kyle Dubas just believes in Nedeljkovic, right? So the channels vote. How do you guys feel about the Penguins? Well, 9% of the channel said first or second place, so that's optimistic, and hey, I'm all for it. 57% say third or fourth, so 66% of the vote either said Pittsburgh will be better than last year, or that the Metro Division weakens above them, and so therefore they end up in fourth place or higher. Fifth or sixth, 30% of the channel felt they weren't improved enough to go beyond fifth or sixth. 4% believe that worse than that, they're seventh or eighth in a very difficult division. Again, there's going to be some votes that are spam votes, hate votes, and all this, but really in general, you look at it, 87% of the vote was third, fourth, or fifth, or sixth. So they're not seen as being elite in the division. They're not really seen as being the worst either. And so the debate can be out there right into the regular season, right? Now, when we get into hits and block shots, most of the players who were at the top of the list here exited the team. So again, this is going to look quite different. Letang of returning Penguins leads in hits with 162. Letang is a hitter when he's in the lineup. Block shots, Marcus Pettersson led there with 131, again, of players who are returning to the team. So while in the top 5 scorers, I'll include guys who aren't there anymore with all these previews. When it comes to hits and block shots, I feel like it's more important to talk about players who are still here. Posts, Raquel and Crosby led the way when it comes to hitting the post. 7 posts according to the NHL. And I will agree with people because I know it's going to get said of that's it. I agree that the NHL, I think, undercounts posts and missed shots, but I can just go with the stats that they give me. So when we look at the additions and the exits, the additions, of course, Erik Karlsson is your headline. He's the guy. He's the one. And how Karlsson does, how quickly he adjusts to the game, and how quickly he feels at home could decide whether or not Pittsburgh gets off to a good start. Riley Smith, much the same. Coming in off winning a Stanley Cup in Vegas. Vegas needing to cut some money. And Pittsburgh saying, fine, we could use a top 6 forward on the wing with the departure of Jason Zucker. And Matt Nieto, a good, solid depth player. Eller gets picked up. Eller coming off of a rough year, and he is older by hockey player standards, so we'll see how Eller basically adjusts to being, I would think, fourth line center in Pittsburgh. He may end up on the third line. Achari, Janssen. Achari and Janssen are guys who Dubas knows what he's getting from them. He's acquainted with them from his time in Toronto. Hinostroza, a player I like a lot, but he could end up being outside of the lineup to start the season, or at the very least maybe ends up being 13th forward. Nedeljkovic, as previously mentioned, added in net. Graves is one that gets added on the blue line. I think he'll play on the penalty kill, and I think he'll be looked towards in order to help bring down the goals against per game, which was far too high this past season. And Rem Pitlick, a guy that, again, a player that I like, a depth player, absolutely, coming over from Montreal. Maybe Rem finds a home in the Pittsburgh organization. He could absolutely end up with Wilkes-Barre as well. And then exits. Jan Ruda, Jeff Petrie, as the blue line is going to look quite different for Pittsburgh this year. Ruda and Petrie being out. Petrie, of course, initially traded to Montreal and then traded to Detroit. Casey DeSmith off to Montreal. Jason Zucker. Dumoulin exits as well as a free agent. Dumoulin did not have a great year for Pittsburgh. I will agree with that. Penguin fans talking a lot about him during the season. But he did play the physical game. The hitting and block shots were there. Paling, depth forward. Heinen, depth forward as well. Archibald, Bonino. Bonino was just a pure rental at the deadline. Kulikov, a rental. And Granlund's contract gets moved in the Karlsson deal. So I think that Dubas did a good job of bringing in Karlsson without making their cap situation worse. It didn't make it better, but you're not going to bring in a guy on a cap hit like Karlsson's and make your cap situation better. It really is a matter of, so is their chance to win a Stanley Cup better? And I will leave that up to you guys to decide whether or not it's better. But at any rate, 66% of the channel say they'll be fourth or higher. So when I'm picking next ones, so I'm going to be doing this with all 32 teams and looking at who might be the next star on the team. I went with Jaeger, the first round draft pick from this year, because honestly, Pittsburgh's been drafting late or trading away draft picks for so many years now. They don't really have another Crosby. They don't really have another Malkin. And that's why if they'd won the draft lottery this year and got Bedard, I am sure people would have had quite the reaction to that. But at any rate, Jaeger ends up getting drafted by them. I figure I'll throw him on the board. Because I know Poulin was a former first-round pick, but I think at this point the idea of him being a star player, probably that boat has sailed. Fantasy sleeper, and looking through the Pittsburgh organization, I figured, you know what? Why not Alex Nylander? Nylander's been hanging around. He very well could end up in Wilkes-Barre himself. He could end up being trade fodder. He could end up being picked up on waivers somewhere. He also could have a good start to the season. We shall see. That consistency throughout a season's been elusive for him at the NHL level, but maybe, right? He's younger than I think people think he is, so maybe he gets some chemistry with some good players and is able to produce. But that's where the fantasy sleeper thing becomes kind of difficult with Pittsburgh too, because we know these players. And so if you're looking for a sleeper, you have to be kind of looking for a player who has potential impact. And with Pittsburgh, there's so many established players, it's tougher to find somebody. MVP has to be Crosby. This team will go as far as Sid the Kid takes him. I will still call him Sid the Kid. I'm allowed. It's allowed. I'm far older than Crosby, so I can still say Kid. But yes, for Crosby, this is going to be a very big season. He and that core of Malkin and of Letang, and I mean, Jari would at this point count as a core guy too, now that he's on an extension, and Karlsson gets added to that. So these guys should come in with a chip on their shoulders and saying we want to play. Like for Karlsson, his whole time in San Jose, he wasn't playing really important games late in the season for the last few years. So he should be rejuvenated and excited in Pittsburgh, and we'll see how things go. Now their schedule is interesting in that on October they have 5 out of 8 at home, and then in November 8 of 13 are on the road. Now last year they were far better at home than on the road, so it's a matter of getting your points at home and then showing that improvement on the road. So if they can improve their road game and maintain really solid play at home, they could end up being above the playoff line. And that's really, that's all it is. You get off to a good start and you just stay there. And force those teams that didn't get off to a good start to have to catch you, which in the National Hockey League with the 3-point system, it's tough. It is not easy to catch teams that start, say, 6 or 8 points ahead of you 10 games into the season. It just makes it that much more difficult. And again, it's interesting because it is an 82-game schedule. People point it out all the time. But those teams that get off to slow starts usually miss the playoffs. Teams that get off to fast starts usually make the playoffs. So Jeff Carter is one that I haven't mentioned yet. I'll mention him here. His contract expires this year. So for Penguin fans who really wanted Carter's contract off the books and were really upset with his play this past season, the one thing I will say, the one asterisk I'd put with Carter at this point, it is the final year of his contract. Maybe he has a bounce back year knowing this might be the final year for his NHL career. Maybe he calls it a career when this upcoming season's done. Certainly, if Pittsburgh did have everything click and they win a Stanley Cup in 2024, that would loan itself to the idea that maybe a veteran or two decide, I'll just hang up the skates, and this is a good way to go out. Crosby is 10 games away from 1,200 in his career. He has 550 goals. Looking back to when he was having concussion problems in the late 2000s, this is remarkable. It says a lot for his conditioning. He played all 82 games this past season, and he's never missed the playoffs that I can tell in back-to-back seasons. So for Sidney Crosby and for the Pittsburgh Penguins, it's really important not to miss the playoffs in back-to-back years. Don't make it a trend. Make sure it's a one-off that we look back and go, yeah, so 2022, 2023 was not indicative of how good this team could be. It is the first season this first time this team has finished with a points percentage below 600 since 2014-2015, which was also the season where they last finished outside the top half of the league in goals scored. So it's important to get those numbers up. Adding Karlsson absolutely should put them in the top half when it comes to the offensive numbers. And it is the first time that they finished outside the top 4 in a division since they were added to an 8-team division years back. So we had 5-team divisions. It feels like not that long ago. And since we went to an 8-team division in the Metro, Pittsburgh was always top 4, which again, 66% of the channels say they're going to bounce back to after finishing 5th this past season. Mike Sullivan has had quite the run behind the bench for them, a record of 337 wins, 187 regulation losses, and 65 overtime or shootout losses. And keep in mind, he was the coach when they won the Cup in 2016 as well as 2017. This is, of course, Dubas's first year as GM, and it feels like adding the former Toronto Maple Leafs general manager has put an increased spotlight on the Pittsburgh Penguins in the offseason, and adding Karlsson has as well. Because if they hadn't added Karlsson, if Dubas wasn't the GM, if they'd gone with somebody internally and somebody we didn't really know, I think the expectations for Pittsburgh would be far lower, and we'd be talking a lot about, well, it's probably time for a rebuild. But the combination of changing GMs as well as bringing in Karlsson brings the expectations up. So what do you expect this season from the Pittsburgh Penguins? Let me know in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.